Good evening once again, my dear friends, and welcome to this hour of lecture. And today I'm going to present to you a continuation of the series of PowerPoint presentations that I have given you during our first meeting. And today I would like to title this presentation as Where Do I Begin? So this is inspired by an old music that we used to sing, Where Do I Begin? But at this moment in time, I don't want to be romantic about these things, but I would like to emphasize the importance of starting your research paper. Because, doing research is like a journey. There is always a destination, and we are always aware of that some way somehow we have to reach our destination. But usually our problem, especially among beginning researchers, neophyte researchers, their usual problem is the identification of a problem. That's why the question is, where do I begin? This is the usual question that I receive from students, especially not only in the graduate school, but most often in the undergrad. And they are they always ask the questions, where do I begin? Because uh, because they are confronted with a lot of questions. They are confronted with the enormity of their topic. That's why they have this kind of dilemma as to where to begin from among these things. And especially among neophyte researchers, usually there is always the tendency for them to say to think big, and later on to regret that they are not able to accomplish the thing that they have intended to do. Because when a person is inexperienced, sometimes there's always the tendency to imagine a lot of things, and sometimes we assume that things are easy and things are will be okay for us. But for a seasoned researcher, there's always this tendency to think and evaluate several factors, including your capability to do it, and also taking into consideration the timetable. So where do I begin? So I will invite you to listen to this lecture, and I hope that this will be a lecture of something that will really enlighten us, especially when we are about to embark on our research endeavors. In our last lecture, I explained to you the nature of knowledge and also the capability, potentials, and limitations of the human mind in acquiring knowledge. Because the research enterprise or the research activity is always focused on generating knowledge and applying this knowledge into our practice in order to improve the quality of our life. But it seems that the sources of knowledge is vast. So if we can just compare it to the vastness of the ocean and to the glass of water that we pour on our glasses, you know, so we are confronted with a world filled with knowledge, filled with information, and yet our mind is just like that of the glass of water, that it can only contain as much as it can. And usually our knowledge is usually sporadic. That's why I always liken or connect the research activity, or a better metaphor to explain the nature of research is that of a crossword puzzle. It seems that we are trying to piece together these pieces of information in order to come up with a whole picture, a mosaic of picture, and yet in between this mosaic there are missing pieces that we need to look for, and this is what we call actually the gap of knowledge, especially in the state of the art. Okay. And last time I also explained to you the meaning of the term state of the art, because in research, when we say state of the art, we refer to the array of information that is available about the specific topic that you are doing some research, so that's the state of the art. And by synthesizing, reading this state of the art, we are able to identify the gap of the knowledge or the gap in the literature, and therefore it gives specificity, and it also determine the parameter of our investigation. In the world, we assume a lot of things, and there are also many assumptions about how we generate knowledge. Like, for example, we say, I believe it is true because it has always been true. So this is a common term that you hear from people. They always assume that since they know this, since this is a common knowledge, then therefore it is something to be believed in. So this can be classified into the sources as a tradition or tenacity, because people, we have traditions. Sometimes these traditions are form of knowledge, information, and practices that we inherited or is passed on to us, which we accept with an unquestioned mind or unquestioning attitude. And sometimes this also has the tenacity to persist in our culture, despite of inculturation, despite of education. Still this kind of beliefs persist. Okay. Another is, we say, I believe it is true because I feel it is true. So there is a saying that majority of people rely on emotions rather than their reason to perceive the truth. This is the main reason why most of the advertisements that we see on television or in the mass media, and most of the speeches of important people and politicians centers on appealing to the emotions of the people, because the common people, or most people should I say, are led to make decisions based on what they feel. That's why in business you have that kind of saying that uh, mm, you spend your money at the spur of the moment. These are kinds of decisions that we never thought of, but simply we base it on how we feel. And this is also a common form or source of knowledge, and we call this intuition. Then third is another assumption is, we say, I believe it is true because an expert say it is true. And often, how easy it is for us human beings to just rely on somebody's authority to define the truth for us. It spares us the effort of being creative, of being critical, of being analytical, because being creative and analytical is not an easy job, because you have to exert a lot of effort and energy. And so, to make the story short, and to keep us from um, experiencing difficulty in our decision making, we usually appeal to authority. That's why one of the form or sources of knowledge in this world is authority. Then sometimes we also say, I believe it is true because I have experienced it. So we put a lot of premium on our experiences, and sometimes we assume that our experience is the norm, is something which everything should conform. And that is a kind of form of knowledge or information that is based on personal experience. Then we also have reasoning. Reasoning. I believe it is true because it is logically derived. So maybe those who are who subscribe to the theory of realism will have to fall on this kind of category. So they have a reliance on reasoning. Then we also have empiricism, as we have said before. It says, I believe it is true because I measured it. So this is part of the scientific method, the empiricism, the emphasis on using the different five senses and using kind of methodology that will measure reality and to give meaning to reality, because they always believe that unless a thing can be quantified, it cannot be considered as scientific information. So this is how we acquire knowledge about the world. So there are varying degrees from tradition, intuition, authority, personal experience, reasoning, and empiricism. And as we go on with our discussion, we are going to move now to the meaning of research. So because research is based on science, so therefore we have to understand what science is, and later on we will be able to establish the meaning of research, the word research, and also begin to appreciate its importance, especially in the field of knowledge generation. And now we come to the next slide, which is about the definition of science. So this is to connect this to the previous slide wherein we outline the different, we identify the different sources of knowledge and the different assumptions of people who possess knowledge. So we go now to science as a way of acquiring knowledge through the continual interaction of empiricism and reasoning. Observation of real events provides the basis for hypotheses that can be tested in methodological and systematic ways. Hypotheses that are not supported by further empirical evidence are abandoned, and new hypotheses are constructed. In this way, general principles are identified and predictions can be made. So this is the basis of theory building. Hypotheses that has been tested and found to be supported by available evidence are then encompassed in the body of knowledge of the discipline. So here in this definition, we emphasize the importance of science as a way of acquiring knowledge with the use of empiricism and reasoning. So there's a combination of logic and empiricism. Because, empiricism refers to the acquisition of knowledge through observation, through measurement, and yet you have to process all of this into a meaningful whole in order to be able to arrive at an acceptable conclusion. That's why there is the marriage between empiricism and reasoning. Now, in science, of course, there is always a debate whether are we really after the truth or are we really after facts. There's a difference because in metaphysics, for example, in philosophy, we always pursue the topic of the real essence or the ultimate nature of a thing. But this is more speculative. That's why in science we do not do such thing, but rather all conclusions that we derive out of hypothesis testing are only contingent reality, meaning to say they are only accepted for the moment as it provides answer to the questions of man or humankind. But this conclusion can give rise to another round of investigation. That's why we say that research is a circular process. And the purpose of hypothesis testing is to provide contribution to theory building. Because, theories are very important because, theories can be defined as a series of concepts that explains a particular phenomenon. So it gives explanation to different phenomenon, and it also becomes a lens in interpreting, organizing the data and information that we receive from the environment. So the purpose also is to be able to contribute to the body of knowledge of the discipline. That's how the body of knowledge grow, and as the body of knowledge grow, it contribute to development and advancement of society. So that is the meaning of science, and of course the research process is scientific. So we come now to the objectives of science. The objectives of science are fourfold. So the first one is to describe. The second is to explain. The third is to predict. And number 4 is to control. So to describe is describing the subject matter and general laws. So this involves describing the phenomenon, describing the different parts of that phenomenon, and also formulating the laws or discovering the laws that are in nature. So second is to explain. Um, the purpose of science is to explain the trends after describing the laws, because when you describe the norms, you're able to discover the norms, identify the norms, then you should also be able to explain the trend, because the trend will explain to us the outcome. So that is actually in the third objective of science, which is to predict the outcome of a particular thing. So it's the same as, like, for example, a concrete example of this is when you study the patterns of the climate or the weather conditions, for example. So you would like to be able to predict which month of the year is the typhoon season. So you would like to predict also the path of the typhoon during these months. So, if you look at, for example, the meteorological reports of some agencies, especially this one in foreign countries, what they do is they try to study the trend of the past years, and they try to study the paths that were undertaken by these typhoons during what time, what month, and what week. And sometimes they are able to come up with a prediction based on previous data, based on the trend that they have discovered from the past. So the fourth objective of science is to control, to manipulate the outcome. So you have to manipulate the outcome, and this is particularly very true in the scientific method of research. For example, when you are conducting experiments and you would like to study the effect of a particular, say, chemical to another chemical, then you try to isolate the specimen of your study, and you also create different groups of samples and try to compare and try to establish a pattern and to ensure that the data is correct. And that is the purpose of to control, to manipulate the outcome, because by trying to manipulate the outcome, we are able to discover a particular outcome, and it contributes to the knowledge about a particular thing. Okay. One important component in the process of research, which is given less attention in some discussion, is the critical thinking process. So the critical thinking process is very crucial in the formulation of the problem and also in the processing of data, because as we test the hypothesis, we also provide interpretations, not only contextualization, but also predicting the future. So the first thing that we need to do, especially if we want to be critical in our process, is first we ask questions. So we tend to examine the situation, and using our the power of our synthesis, the power of our comprehension, we develop questions that will further enhance our understanding of the given phenomena. Then, aside from that, we should also be able to objectively define the problems, because it is easy to be buried in all these concerns and discourses and discussions. But in the end, if there is no objectively defined problems, there will be no clear conclusion. Then third, we have to examine the available evidence. We have to weigh down all these evidences, perhaps using a benchmark or using our logical reasoning. Number 4, assess the assumptions and biases. So, it's impossible to truly eliminate biases, because everywhere we go, there will always be biases because of our background and perhaps because of our different experiences. But a good researcher would be able to set aside all these biases in such a way that a clear understanding of the situation or assessment of the situation is paid attention to. Then number 5, avoid emotional reasoning. So we should make ourselves detached. We should detach ourselves from the emotional aspect of the situation. Then number 6, separate the facts from opinions. So we should be able to distinguish what is factual and what is coming from our opinions. Our opinions are just our own perceptions. It's just our way of looking at things, and that's the way how we use our mental lenses in order to shape our attitude and our outlook. Then 7, we have to avoid oversimplifying. So it is easy to come up with generalizations without proper collecting of evidence and assessment of evidence. But as a researcher, we should avoid this kind of situations. Then number 8, consider alternative explanations. So we should be open-minded. In layman's term, this is what we mean by being open-minded. Then 9 is tolerate uncertainty. It's not the purpose of science to be truly exact, but that's why we have to tolerate uncertainty, because particularly in the process of testing the hypothesis, we will encounter challenges as this. That's why scientists in the physical sciences, they have to control the specimen. So they have to set forth a laboratory so that the specimen is not affected by other situations. So in the social sciences, in the same way, we should also be able to tolerate those unintended outcome, because these are truly natural and they will come along the way. And then 10 is maintain an air of skepticism but remain open-minded. So skepticism is different from cynical. Cynical is like that sort of a runaway negativity. But skepticism is a kind of attitude that we express our doubt because we are giving the doubt a chance to prove itself. That's the meaning of skepticism when we think of the research process. The research process. The research process consists of 6 steps. Number 1 is assume a natural cause. Second, make an educated guess. 3, test your guess. 4, revise your hypothesis. 5, retest your guess. And 6, make a conclusion. So let's go back to number 1, assume a natural cause. The research process always starts with a phenomenon, and usually this phenomenon is characterized by a cause and effect. That's why in research it's important that we should understand the role of dependent variables and independent variables and other forms of intervening variables that may impact on the dependent variable. Because our investigation will always redound to the process of cause and effect. That is the meaning of assuming a natural cause. Then second is make an educated guess. So if there are questions arising from this cause and effect relationship, of course there's a need to have an educated guess, or this is what we call the hypothesis. But in research and in scientific method, the hypothesis does not come from nowhere. It is not even based on a mere opinion, but rather a hypothesis is based on a body of knowledge that is already present, or some sort of evidence that will give weight to the concepts and variables in that hypothesis. So that's the meaning of hypothesis, an educated guess. That's why it's called educated guess, because it is not an opinion, it is not a haphazard guess, but rather it is a guess that is a product of research, a product of reading and review of literature. Then number 3 is test your guess. This is now the hypothesis testing. You're going to employ your data gathering, methods of analysis, design of analysis, unit of analysis, and the tools that you're going to use to gather the data and to analyze and process the data. That is the meaning of we have to test the guess. Then after that, whenever there are initial findings, then we could proceed to number 4, which is revise your hypothesis. Then after revising the hypothesis, you can retest your hypothesis again for confirmation, and after that, we arrive at the conclusion. And we should also take note that the conclusion is a very important part of the research process. Usually it is some sort of neglected, as I observed in some researches, but I think the conclusion is very crucial and very important because it informs us as to the body of knowledge or the gap that has been bridged by the research. So, because a research activity is not a linear activity, but rather it is a circular and a cyclic process, because the conclusion is not the final end of the knowledge generation work, but rather the conclusion can even give further. It can open further opportunities for uh, research and investigation. Okay, let us give an example, a concrete example to the research process that I have discussed with you earlier. Okay, so for example, here is your assumption or maybe your observation. So you notice that the leaves on a particular plant in your garden are turning yellow and wilting. So perhaps you will explore the idea, what could be the reason why my plant in the garden are turning yellow and wilting? So you make this hypothesis. You hypothesize that the yellowing and wilting of the leaves are due to the insufficient water. So that is your hypothesis. Then you set up now your experiment. You decide to water the plant more frequently over the next 2 weeks while keeping all other conditions the same. So you measure the plant's response by observing the changes in the color and health of the leaves. So then you go to observation. After 2 weeks, the leaves are still yellowing and wilting even with increased watering. So you have now to revise your hypothesis because the conclusion or the observation of your study does not conform to the earlier hypothesis. So you revise your hypothesis to consider the possibility of a nutrient deficiency instead of just water. So you put up again another experimental setup and you apply a balanced fertilizer to the soil and continue to monitor the plant's health. So after that, you observe that over the next 2 weeks, you notice the leaves gradually regain their green color and vitality. So this is an example of the research process wherein you apply certain conditions of observations. Okay. So, my dear friends, I would like to go back to the title of this presentation. As I have said, where do I begin? So, usually these are the problems of students, their difficulties, especially if they are enrolling for the first time in methods of research. Their question is always, what are the sources of problems? Where do I get my problem? Before you enroll in the graduate school, it is already assumed that you have a particular problem to work on. And I hope that people interviewing students for admission should make this as a point of reference in interviewing and qualifying students, because graduate students, when they enter the graduate school, should already have something in mind what they want to work on. But nonetheless, these are already immaterial for our purpose, because our main purpose now is to be able to help you identify your problem. So there are many ways. I have listed here 5 sources of problem, and they are number 1, interviews; second, personal experiences; third, interdisciplinary perspective; fourth, deduction from theory; and 5, relevant literature. So I guess they are not arranged here and according to importance, but I would assume that the number 1, interview, is an important part in identifying the sources of problem. Because before you go to conduct the interview, you should first have an idea, a general idea of what your problem will be. Because the interview is not per se the source of problem, but rather it is an instrument in order to discover and to find out what are the things that can be the subject of your investigation, or the subject of your thesis, or the subject of your research. Okay, so you conduct an interview, you ask especially the stakeholders, you go to experts, interview them, or maybe you gather your friends who are also with the same interest, and then gain some perspective or input coming from them through a brainstorming session. Okay, so the second is personal experiences. In the practice of our profession, sometimes we encounter questions, sometimes we encounter difficulties, or probably our own observation of the environment, of the things around us, can give us already an input as to what kind of problem I can have in order to come up with a research problem. Then third, interdisciplinary perspective. What do I mean here by interdisciplinary perspective? Because a particular problem can be viewed or can be addressed based on a different perspective or different approach, different discipline. Like for example, the topic of you would like to study a specific topic on climate change, for example. So climate change is both a science, meteorology, or probably engineering, or probably social sciences, because it involves people and communities. And these are what I mean. These are what I mean of interdisciplinary, because the topic that you think of can be addressed from a different perspective and using different approaches. So perhaps you can interview the scientist, you can interview the social scientist, you can interview a social worker, or probably a village official, for example. Okay. So number 4 is deductions from theory. We read a lot of theory from the literature, and theories are not just imaginations, but rather the theory that are present in the state-of-the-art milieu of the topic actually is it's not derived from imagination, but rather it is a synthesis of all the studies, of all the knowledge generated from research, and you put a perspective to it, and that is the theory. That's why reading theories or applying theories can be a source of possible research questions or problems. And of course, number 5 is the relevant literature. The review of literature is very important, and this is something that we cannot just set aside. As I am always want to say, you cannot be a good writer if you are not a good reader. So you cannot write a research paper unless you have read one, or you have read several of these papers, and that would make you a good writer. And usually, the relevant literature is one of the source of problem, because by reading the literature, we discover the gap in the knowledge. It's like the illustration I have said before about the jigsaw puzzle. So from this relevant literature or jigsaw puzzle, or pieces of jigsaw puzzles, we can discover the gap, or what is missing in the picture to complete the picture. So, my dear friends, I hope I have given you the different sources of problems. So, if you are trying to look for your research problem, try to pay attention to these 5 sources of problem. So, I will now proceed now to the next slide, and here I'm going to give you an example. Maybe I will sample some of this problem derived using these approaches, or this derived taking from these sources. So here is an example of the problem derived from interviewing. So the research problem goes this way: understanding the impact of remote work on employee productivity and well-being in the post-pandemic era. So you would like to know why, what is the impact of work employee on productivity and well-being in this post-pandemic era. So here is the scenario. Initial observation. Researchers notice a significant increase in remote work arrangement across various industries, including and after the COVID-19 pandemic. So this prompts their interest in studying the effects of remote work. So here you conduct the interview. The researchers decide to conduct interviews with human resource managers, business leaders, and employees from several companies to gather insights into the remote work trend. So here are the findings of the interview. Number one, many employees report increased job satisfaction and reduced commuting stress due to remote work. Then second, some employees express concern about the blurring boundaries between work and personal life, leading to burnout. Third, HR managers mention challenges in monitoring and managing remote employees' performance. And number four, business leaders mention potential cost saving but are uncertain about the long-term impacts on company culture and innovation. Fourth, identifying the research problem. Based on the interview findings, the researchers identify a research problem related to the impact of remote work on employee productivity and well-being. They realize there is a need for a comprehensive study to, number one, investigate the factors contributing to employee satisfaction and productivity in remote work environments. Number two, explore strategies for mitigating burnout and maintaining work-life balance in remote work setups. And third, examine the effectiveness of performance management practices for remote teams. And fourth, assess the long-term implications of remote work on organizational culture and innovation. Formulating research questions. From the identified research problem, the researchers formulate specific research questions to guide their study, such as, number one, what are the key drivers of employee satisfaction and productivity in remote work environments? Two, how can organizations effectively address burnout and maintain work-life balance for remote employees? Number three, what performance management strategies are most effective for remote teams? And what are the long-term impacts of remote work on organizational culture and innovation? So when you come now to the research design and data collection, the researchers design a research study to answer these questions using a combination of survey, quantitative analysis, and follow-up interviews with a large sample of organization and employees. Here is another example of a research problem derived from interdisciplinary perspective. So the research problem is like this: enhancing sustainable urban development through interdisciplinary collaboration. So the initial observation is that the researchers and urban planners notice that urban development projects often face sustainability challenges, such as traffic congestion, pollution, and unequal access to green spaces. So what the researchers did is in order to gain a comprehensive understanding of the issues, the researchers conducted interviews with various stakeholders, including urban planners, environmental scientists, transportation engineers, community leaders, and residents. The findings of the interview are this. So number one, urban planners highlight the need for more green and pedestrian-friendly spaces in cities. Second, environmental scientists discuss the importance of reducing carbon emissions and conserving natural resources. Third, Transportation engineers point out the challenges of improving public transportation and reducing traffic congestion. And community leaders and residents express concerns about affordable housing and social equity in urban development.